I've been sitting here for an hour trying to figure out how to start this. Maybe I should just say it. 2 weeks ago at dinner, my dad insulted me by calling me a broken condom baby, and now my family is falling apart. I'm not sure if I'm looking for advice or just need to get this out, but here's what happened. It started with something stupid, like most disasters do. We were eating spaghetti, Mom's usual Wednesday meal, and my brother Jake was talking about his baseball game while Dad nodded along proudly as usual. I can't even recall exactly why I asked, but before I knew it, I ended up asking why he never wanted to play catch with me. I'm 16, so it wasn't like I was begging for constant daddy-son time, but still, while he coaches Jake's team and drives him to every practice, he conveniently forgot my choir concert last month again. Dad set his fork down with a smirk and then insulted me by reminding everyone that I was a broken condom baby, emphasizing that they had only planned for one child. Mom's fork clattered against her plate as she just stared at him with a pale face, while Jake continued eating as if nothing had happened. Dad laughed off the whole thing as if it were just a matter of biology and went back to his food. I wish I could say I brushed it off, but I've spent my whole life feeling like a guest in this family. Jake's trophies fill the mantle, and my art projects end up stored in the garage. When I made the honor roll, Dad always had an excuse about work, but whenever Jake struck out 3 times at a game, he whisked him away for burgers. Later that night, I cornered Mom in the kitchen, where she was scrubbing the same pan for what felt like an eternity. I asked her if there was any truth to Dad's remark. She wouldn't meet my eyes as she admitted that they had planned on having only one child. In a quiet, almost defeated tone, she explained that the condom had failed and she hadn't been able to overcome her reservations about fixing what she now considered a mistake. That's when Dad walked in and, clearly having heard enough, snapped that we were both overreacting and that it had all been just a joke. Since then, he hasn't really spoken to me directly, choosing instead to make snide, passive-aggressive comments to Mom about when I'd stop sulking. When Jake noticed I was acting off and inquired about it, I tried to explain, but he just shrugged it off, saying that Dad had always been that way and that I shouldn't take it personally, something that was easy for him to say. Mom tried to get Dad to apologize, but he instead accused her of coddling me and insisted that I needed to toughen up. That's when I realized that this wasn't really about me at all. It was about him. While cleaning out Christmas decorations in the attic last weekend, I discovered an old journal of his. As I flipped through the pages, I found entries from when Mom was pregnant with me, filled with thoughts about feeling trapped, not being ready, and that everything had been ruined. I confronted him, which turned out to be a mistake. He flushed with anger, launched into a tirade about privacy, and slammed the door with such force that the picture frames rattled. Mom actually stood up for me, telling him that he was poisoning our family. He ended up staying in a hotel for 2 nights, and when he returned, he had bought a new baseball glove for Jake without even glancing in my direction. Mom told him to return the glove unless he started treating all of us equally, but he refused and claimed that Jake earned his love by not being sensitive. Since then, I've been eating alone in my room while Mom brings me plates, always with an extra serving of mashed potatoes, and sits on the edge of my bed. She hardly speaks, instead staring blankly at the wall with dark circles under her eyes. Yesterday, Dad's sister, Aunt Linda, reached out to me. She explained that Dad had always been bitter because Grandma favored his younger brother and suggested that he was now repeating the same cycle. I wasn't sure if this was an excuse or just some context, but it didn't fix anything. This morning, Dad demanded that Mom fix me, threatening to cancel our long-awaited summer trip to the Grand Canyon, a trip we've been planning for a year. Mom shot back by saying I needed to fix myself first, and ever since then, Dad has given us nothing but the silent treatment. Jake has been slamming doors, and Mom has been downing more coffee than usual. I've even taken to typing from my closet, as it's the only quiet place left where I can think. I keep coming back to that journal entry where he wrote that everything was ruined. Part of me wants to shout at him and tell him he is the one who has ruined everything. Yet another part wonders if perhaps he might be right, and that maybe I am the problem. But then I remember the tired look on Mom's face when she said I needed to fix myself first, a look that wasn't truly sad, just exhausted. Last night, Jake left his glove on the kitchen table, a Rawlings $200 model with a handwritten note from Dad, a dedication to his MVP. I made sure to put it back exactly where it had been. I don't know how things will end. Mom is talking about therapy, but Dad dismisses it as something only weak people do. Meanwhile, Jake has started hanging out with his friends after school instead of coming home. And I'm applying for part-time jobs so I can save up for something. Maybe college, or perhaps just enough gas money to drive away and never look back. The worst part is that, despite everything, part of me still longs to play catch with him. Not because I've suddenly taken a shine to baseball, but because I yearn to experience what it feels like to be like Jake for even a few minutes. To be the kid who gets celebrated with burgers after a mistake on the field. But I'm not Jake. I'm the one he now sees as the broken condom baby. And at this point, that's all I'll ever be to him. Maybe things will improve. Or maybe mom will eventually leave. Or perhaps dad will come to realize one day that he has 2 kids instead of 1. Or maybe I'll just keep eating mashed potatoes in my room, waiting for someone to assure me that none of this is my fault. I appreciate anyone who takes the time to read this. I don't know what I truly need, but at least it helps to get this off my chest. Now for the first update. 2 weeks had passed since I first posted about my dad calling me a broken condom baby, and I thought things couldn't get any worse, but I was wrong. After the initial blow-up, Dad began taking Jake out for ice cream after his baseball games, not just once, but every time. At first, Jake either didn't notice or didn't care that I wasn't invited. But last Thursday, as Dad headed out with his keys jingling, Jake paused and questioned why I was never included, glancing at me from the stairs. Dad didn't even look my way. He simply stated that I had made my choice, as if I had picked a side in some war he had created. Jake's face twitched as if he wanted to argue but couldn't find the words, and he followed Dad out with his shoulders hunched. The next morning, I found Mom crying in the laundry room. Not the quiet, graceful kind of crying, but the raw kind that shook her whole body while she wiped her nose on a folded towel. She told me that Dad had been blaming her for turning me against him, as if I were some puppet under her control. I wanted to scream, but instead, I wrote a letter to Dad, not as a sappy plea, but to lay out the facts, how it felt to be called a mistake, and how I would give anything to be seen as more than an inconvenience. I left the letter on his desk, right on top of the unpaid bills he always complained about. He ended up shredding it. Mom had seen him do it, and later told me in a flat tone, as if her outrage had finally run dry, that he was killing the family. That was the first time I believed her. That night, Dad packed a duffel bag and left for his brother's cabin, insisting he needed space as if he were the one feeling suffocated. After that, Mom began sleeping in my room. She would curl up on the floor with a blanket, insisting that it didn't matter, but I could hear her shifting every hour as if her bones were too heavy to lie still. Jake started failing math, and when I tried to help him with his homework, he slammed his textbook shut while demanding to know why I cared, pointing out that I wasn't his mom. It stung, but I understood. Dad had been whispering in his ear, portraying me as the villain. Jake had always been the golden child, but now it seemed he was trapped in an unwanted role. He even began leaving his dirty cleats in the hallway again, a habit he hadn't had since he was 12, and Mom didn't even scold him. Then texts from Aunt Linda began arriving, saying that Dad was telling everyone I was holding a grudge and that some of the cousins thought I should apologize. I didn't reply because really, what was there to apologize for? On Saturday, Mom's best friend Karen brought over groceries. She hugged Mom longer than usual in the doorway and quietly reminded her that she couldn't afford a lawyer yet, which made Mom nod with her lips pressed into a thin line. Dad returned unexpectedly on Sunday. Mom and I were on the couch watching a silly baking show, and we even shared a laugh over a pun about soggy cake bottoms. Then the front door slammed open. Dad appeared with a suitcase in hand, staring at us as if we had set the house on fire. In a cold, quiet tone, he asked if we were plotting our next move. Mom stood up with trembling hands and without raising her voice, told him to leave. He then turned to me and demanded that I apologize so we could fix things, as if I were the one who needed fixing. I simply shook my head. He then grabbed Jake's arm and let him out, and Jake didn't look back. About an hour later, Jake sent me a text saying that Dad believed I was tearing the family apart, leaving me unsure how to respond. That same night, Mom discovered Dad's hidden savings account, $15,000 stashed away in a credit union he thought she would never check. She confronted him through texts, and he replied by calling both of us delusional before blocking us. Mom had a meeting with a lawyer planned for the following day. She explained that it was just to explore her options, though her hands had not stopped shaking since she found that account. I felt partly relieved, but equally terrified, wondering what if Dad was right and I truly was the reason everything was crumbling. Yet I recalled the shredded letter, the hollow sound of Mom's crying, and how Jake flinched every time his phone buzzed. It became clear that this wasn't just about a crude insult. It was about a man who would rather watch his life burn than admit he was holding the matches. I had no idea what would happen next. Mom was trying to be strong, even though I noticed her staring at old family photos when she thought I wasn't watching. Jake spent most nights sleeping at a friend's house, and as for me, I was just trying to get through each day without feeling like my chest might cave in. I ended by thanking anyone who kept listening, because sometimes just saying it out loud makes the burden a little lighter. Now for the second update. It's been a month since my last update, and I'm not even sure where to start. Everything's shifted, as if someone had kicked the ground out from under us and we're still falling. After Mom refused Dad's settlement offer, the one in which she would get the house but lose alimony if she kept me away, he showed up drunk, not tipsy, not buzzed, but utterly drunk, his slurred words falling together like wet paper. He stood on the porch, yelling that I had ruined his life, his voice cracking at the end. The neighbors must have heard him because the cops showed up, their flashlights slicing through the dark. Mom stood in the doorway with her hand gripping the frame so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Jake was upstairs. I could hear his video game music freeze mid-song. When the officers asked if we wanted to press charges, Mom declined, not because she lacked the desire, but because she was too tired to add another fight to our pile. The next day, Jake moved into my room. His belongings were scattered everywhere. Dirty socks, baseball caps, a half-eaten bag of chips he swore he would finish. He mentioned that Dad had been trash-talking me for weeks, claiming I was too soft and would never survive in the real world. I didn't know what to say. It's one thing to know that your dad resents you, but it was another shock to hear my little brother repeat it as if it were a fact. Then came the job situation. Dad had always boasted about his high-ranking position at the firm, but it turned out he had been demoted months ago. The reason was that he had screamed at a female coworker in front of everyone. I later learned that Jake had overheard him on the phone, ranting that nobody respected a man who answered to a woman. Mom found the demotion letter hidden in a drawer, and she didn't even seem surprised. Money was tight, but Mom was using the savings account that Dad had hidden, the $15,000 he thought she'd never find. She began paying the bills in cash, her mouth set in a tight line as she counted out 20s. I remembered her once murmuring that he would eventually notice, but by then it would be too late. Lately, Jake had been skipping school. His teacher called last week, and I covered for him by saying he had a fever because Mom was at work and I didn't want to worry her. When I confronted Jake about it, he just shrugged and remarked that there was no point since Dad wasn't around to care if he failed. I wanted to shake him, but instead, I sat on his bed and told him that I cared. He didn't reply, yet he went to school the next day. Then Aunt Linda texted me a photo of Dad at a bar with a woman who looked my age. The woman had neon pink hair, and Dad's arm was draped over her shoulder as if it were a seatbelt. I showed the picture to Mom, expecting tears, but she merely snorted and made it clear that Dad should be allowed to destroy himself. Later, I caught her studying the photo, zooming in on Dad's face as though she were searching for the man she had once married. I got a job at the grocery store. It wasn't anything glamorous, just stocking shelves and sweeping up broken pasta boxes, but it helped. When Dad found out, he showed up in the produce aisle, reeking of cologne, and told me to quit because he believed I was embarrassing him. My manager, Rosa, who didn't tolerate any harassment of her staff, immediately banned him from the store. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of safety. The custody battle was the worst part. Dad's lawyer claimed that Mom was unfit because she allowed me to work. But during the custody hearing, when the judge asked Jake where he wanted to live, he responded that he always wanted to live with Mom. In response, Dad called him a traitor. That night, when Jake came home, he threw his mitt against the wall and explained that Dad had bought it for him after his demotion, almost like a bribe. I began to wonder which version of Dad Jake was referring to. At therapy, which was Mom's idea really, Jake confessed that he was terrified of turning into Dad, even wondering aloud what would happen if he started hating women too as he fiddled with a loose thread on the couch. I didn't have an answer, so I just hugged him, and he didn't pull away. Mom's birthday was last week. On that day, Dad sent divorce papers accompanied by a note that read, "Happy Freedom." Mom laughed sharply, a bitter sound, and stuck the papers to the fridge with a magnet, insisting that they were proof of his ongoing asshole behavior. Later that night, I overheard her talking with Karen on the phone, her voice shaking as she admitted that she had expected him to fight for us. I'm applying to colleges 3 states away. Mom says she's proud, though I've caught her crying when she thought I was asleep. Lately, she's been leaving community college brochures on my desk, almost as if she hoped I might change my mind. But I won't. I hate that I'm leaving her here in a house haunted by Dad's ghost. The TikTok video was Jake's doing. He burst into my room and shoved his phone in my face to show a video of Dad with his shirt unbuttoned, grinning on a beach with his new girlfriend. The video claimed they were in Hawaii together, with Dad calling her his soulmate. Mom was supposed to go to Hawaii for their 20th anniversary, but she only watched the video once before handing the phone back, remarking that she hoped it would rain, and then returning to prune her roses. I don't know what happens next. Mom's lawyer says the house is ours now, and Dad is emptying his savings in a vain effort to look rich for the court. Jake has started talking to his therapist about anger management. And as for me, I'm just trying to get through each shift at the store without crying in the frozen aisle. Sometimes, though, when Mom is gardening or when Jake is laughing at some dumb meme, I feel okay. I'm not fixed or whole, but maybe that's enough for now. Now for the final update. It's been a month since my last update, and honestly, I didn't think things could get any weirder. But life's funny like that. Just when you think you've hit rock bottom, the ground cracks open a little more. Dad's girlfriend dumped him. Apparently, he yelled at a waiter for bringing him the wrong kind of breadsticks, and she decided that neon pink hair and a midlife crisis just weren't worth the drama. Mom found out when he started blowing up her phone, begging to come home. She didn't even hesitate. She simply called a locksmith while I sat at the kitchen table eating cereal and watching her scribble the words change locks on her to-do list like it was just another grocery item. When he showed up that night, jiggling the handle and shouting about his rights, Mom made it clear that if he didn't sign the papers, she would drain every hidden account he had. He signed. The judge awarded Mom the house, alimony, and child support. Jake later told me that Dad had argued in court that Mom was turning us against him, but the judge dismissed him, describing his behavior as both petty and self-destructive. I wasn't there, but I like to imagine Mom sitting perfectly still in the blazer she picked up at Goodwill after Dad froze our joint account, not even smirking. Jake's doing better. His grades improved once he started therapy, and he even made the baseball team again. Yet he told the coach that Dad wasn't allowed at the games. When I asked him why, he just shrugged and explained that he didn't need Dad messing things up even more. It hit me then. Jake wasn't the oblivious kid who would brush off Dad's comments anymore. He was learning to set boundaries, just like I was. Mom's turned into a gardening fanatic. Our backyard used to be what Dad considered his territory, a rusty grill and a folding chair where he'd sit to drink beer and ignore us. Now it's full of sunflowers and tomato plants. She wears this floppy hat she found at a garage sale, her knees always smudged with dirt, and when she comes back inside, she leaves clumps of soil on the floor like little breadcrumbs. I never sweep them up. It feels like proof that she's still here, still fighting. Dad sent me an email last week, a rambling, typo-filled tirade about how I had betrayed him and broken up the family. I read the first line, where he claimed I would understand when I had kids, and I deleted it immediately. Later, Mom found me staring at my laptop without asking any questions. She simply brought me a cup of tea and remarked that he'd always been good at blaming everyone but himself. I got into college, 3 states away, which feels equal parts thrilling and terrifying. When I told Mom, she hugged me so tight that my ribs creaked before she immediately started researching scholarships. Still, I've caught her crying in the laundry room, folding my old t-shirts into neat squares as if she were preserving artifacts. Jake promised to visit every break, though I'm pretty sure it was just because I mentioned buying him pizza. Graduation was surreal. Dad appeared uninvited, loitering by the parking lot in a suit that seemed 2 sizes too big. I walked right past him, my heels clicking on the asphalt, without looking back. Mom later mentioned that he had left before they even called my name. Part of me wonders if he had stood there hoping I'd cave and give him some grand moment of redemption. But mostly, I'm just exhausted. Mom's dating, sort of. There's a guy from her gardening club named Greg who wears socks with sandals and laughs in a way that reminds me of a seagull. Jake thinks he's generally acceptable, which in our family is high praise. The first time Greg visited, he brought her a potted fern and left before dinner. When Mom placed it on the windowsill, she blushed, something I hadn't seen her do in years. I ran into Dad at the grocery store last week. He was in the cereal aisle, staring at a box of Lucky Charms as if it held the secrets of the universe. He looked smaller and thinner, his hair more gray than brown. When he saw me, he froze for a moment, then muttered an apology and power walked away with his cart squeaking behind him. I stood there holding a jar of peanut butter, wondering if that single word would ever be enough for closure. Mom's going back to school. She wants to be a social worker, which makes sense since she's had a crash course in crisis management over these past few months. She's using the alimony for tuition, and I've never seen her so excited. She even practices speaking in a professional tone in front of the mirror sometimes, a habit Jake and I can't help but laugh at. But when she talks about helping kids in tough situations, her eyes turn fierce, and I really believe she'll be great. While packing for college, I found the shredded pieces of the letter I had written to Dad months ago, the one he fed into the shredder without even reading. I'd kept the fragments in an old shoebox like some pathetic time capsule, but this time, I tossed them. Mom never questioned why the kitchen trash was suddenly full of confetti. She drove me to campus last week. We both cried for exactly 3 minutes. then spent the rest of the drive laughing about Dad's disastrous Hawaii trip. Turns out it rained the whole time. When she pulled away, I stood there clutching my dorm key, watching her car disappear. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. I got a text this morning from an unknown number that simply said you win, and I blocked it. Tonight, Mom's making tacos, and Jake's bringing his new girlfriend. He mentioned that she was generally not too annoying. We're not okay, but we're here, and maybe that's enough.